All right, guys. I guess we'll get started. We may have some people filter in a few moments, but that's okay. So first of all, I just want to welcome everybody to today's session. For those that don't know, my name is Bill Lennox, and I'll be one of your co-hosts today. In today's session, Jason will explain how business continuity and information security are pretty much two facts of the same coin. They both ensure your organization can stand up to any disruptions while also safeguarding your operations and protecting your data. So the session today is kind of like a brief overview. So Jason is our expert on this topic. So if you guys have lots of questions, feel free to queue them up, save them for the end. We'll have some time reserved to review everything once the presentation is done. And if we can't get them answered during the presentation, we'll make sure we take your information and either give you a call or get you an email out to answer any questions you have that we don't have off the top of our heads, okay? With that being said, let's get started. I'd like to introduce our presenter of today and co-host, Jason Winter from Castleland. Go ahead, Jason. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Bill, for the introduction. And I really appreciate everyone for taking the time today to listen to me to talk about the link between business continuity and dealing with adverse events such as information security situations. Now, I've spent the better part of my career either leading or heavily involved in the development of emergency management, business continuity, and disaster recovery strategies and plans across many different sectors and industries. So I hope you gain some insight from what I'm going to be sharing today, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. Every day, communities, organizations, local, provincial, or federal government agencies are at the risks of hazards and threats like no other time, whether they are natural risks, such as earthquakes, floods, or hurricanes, or man-made threats such as cyber terrorism, geopolitical disruptions, fraud, or data breaches. Organizations are stretched to the limit of being able to not only respond appropriately, but also to put in place measures that would protect against and minimize the risks of these and many other threats. Now, in addition to the traditional threat vectors that organizations must contend with, the world within which we operate is becoming much more dependent on technology. And with the globalization of goods and services, business and supply chains have become much more intertwined. Now, you know, they say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, in this case, numbers say it all. By 2025, climate impacts will be slowing Canada's economic growth by $25 billion annually, which is equal to 50% of projected GDP growth. In 2023 alone, more than $3.7 billion were due to climate-related emergencies. I'm going to break that down a little bit for you. Of that $3.7 billion just in 2023, $1.8 billion was spent for firefighting and insurance claims for the wildfires that British Columbia had. $1.3 billion were in healthcare costs in just 1 week due to the smoke traveling from the Quebec fires last summer in 2023. $165 million in insurance payouts for the Nova Scotia wildfires, and then another $170 million in insured losses from the flooding that province, Nova Scotia, dealt with a few months later. And then finally, $350 million in damages from the summer storms that Ontario had to face in 2023 as well. Now, even though this is a little bit dated, the Fort McMurray wildfires in 2016 were Canada's most expensive natural disaster, with $11 billion in damages and business interruption. And I want to emphasize the business interruption. And we're going to talk a little bit more about why that is so relevant to maintaining or enhancing business resilience. Now, let's turn our attention to some cyber-related incidents and costs. More than 86% of Canadian businesses experience some sort of cyber attack, which is on average about an 8% year-over-year increase. So considering how frequently Canadian businesses are impacted, let's look at how significant those impacts are financially. On average, It costs an organization $7 million to remediate from data breaches, $2 million on average for ransomware attacks. And these figures grow year after year as incidents become more sophisticated and dig deeper into organizations. As mentioned in the previous slide, supply chains are becoming such a critical source of resources, materials, and parts that fuel our economy. Yet there have been such a staggering increase in cyber-related attacks over the past 5 years. And finally, although this is a US statistic, almost 350 billion victims of cyber-related attacks or incidents US-wide were in 2023 alone. Now, this, unfortunately, is the landscape that we're living in. And these really are only two categories of threat vectors that organizations, communities, and levels of government must contend with day in and day out. One other point to consider before we move on is that these statistics only focus on the financial impacts. But what about the non-financial impacts, such as brand reputation, customer loyalty, resource impacts, such as staff absenteeism, family impacts, and the livelihoods of small business owners, and much more? A balance between responding to the current threat, such as an information security breach, and maintaining a continuity of operation enables business resilience. Another aspect to consider is that disruptions to an organization may come from an inability to meet a customer's expectations, and it may shake the ability of an organization to remain resilient. Now, gone are the days when customers were accepting of an unexpected downtime, while an all-hands-on-deck response and recovery was done. They would much rather trust in an organization that will anticipate and manage risk in a measured and, where possible, proactive manner. Now, simply put, today's consumers expect the modern organization to be resilient. In other words, for it to deliver on its value proposition, even in the face of negative circumstances. This also means that resilience is a fundamental and valuable business differentiator in today's rapidly changing environment. And it enables an overall reduction in the risk profile of your organization, but provides the ability to anticipate and adapt to potential risks and threats that are continually knocking on your door. Now, the traditional opinion describes business resilience as a defensive strategy, meaning resistance and/or recovery. But there's a growing perspective that describes business resilience as rather an offensive response, including adaptation or even the notion of anticipation. Many professionals that focus on the response and recovery of cyber-related events refer to the term of situational awareness. However, the context for having a sense of anticipation based on really seeing what's going on around you is really what defines situational awareness. This helps support the proactive and offensive position of business resilience. Whether your organization prioritizes resistance over adaptation, the sheer foundation of either approach requires a much more robust strategy. The reality is that this is not an IT problem. This is an organizational problem, similar to how organizations used to consider information security. The one question I get often is how to get this conversation out of IT. And hopefully, through the rest of this presentation, I'll be able to help answer that question. As mentioned in the last slide, many organizations consider business resilience as a new way of thinking about risk. As systems and organizations cannot be designed to fully anticipate all of the possible risks related to information security, organizations need to become resilient in order to deal with the events that will have serious consequences, even when they have a low probability of occurring. Business resilience includes a need to have continuity of operation, as well as the ability to recover technology infrastructure and solutions based on the expectations outlined from the business. But these two components are more than just business recovery. It's a change in mindset, culture, and approach that drives the implementation of resilient measures and practices throughout and by the business. Now, while risk management is a topic all on its own, One fundamental aspect includes identifying critical services and how information and data play a vital role in supporting those critical services. To reduce intolerable impacts of cybersecurity breaches and the associated impacts, the services most critical to the ongoing viability of an organization must be made resilient. Not everything can be made resilient at once. Therefore, it's critical to not only prioritize, but also to focus on the products and services the organization provides to customers, as well as what makes up these products and services, the supporting business processes, the systems, the people, and certainly the data. Business continuity is different from disaster recovery and incident response, which are two other critical components of business resilience, in that the focus is not on rebuilding or alleviating the effects of a disaster or adverse event, but focuses on sustaining the delivery of services essential to the organization's survival in light of an adverse event, such as a data breach or other cyber-related threats. If your organization has a sound business continuity plan, it can continue to provide mission-critical services no matter what happens. Businesses that have both disaster recovery and business continuity functions are already a step ahead, since these are distinct functions that can both make or break the success of a company. However, at many organizations, these two groups don't fully understand what the other does. And sometimes employees feel that the other department is stepping on their toes. So what distinguishes disaster recovery and business continuity? Although the two strategies have plenty of overlapping interests, their main goals are actually quite different. Disaster recovery and incident response seeks to minimize the impacts of incidents after they have occurred, while business continuity is focused on the continuity of key business operations. Now, effectively managing an emergency such as a cybersecurity breach will impact business continuity efforts, but these two are not identical. Disaster recovery most often manifests as the procedures and actions that are taken immediately after a crisis has occurred. The business continuity team, on the other hand, takes proactive steps to maintain or restore the organization to its pre-crisis state. The ideal corporate setup, disaster recovery and incident response and business continuity personnel would all be completely separate entities with their own teams. Although in practice, in my experience, these roles often get lumped together based on the misguided notion that they're all one and the same. In reality, disaster recovery and business continuity involve very distinct tasks. Disaster recovery and incident response involves quickly assessing the technical impacts of the breach, attack, or other adverse event as they begin to perform a prioritized recovery as soon as practical. Business continuity tasks include protecting the business's reputation online, establishing and maintaining redundant systems and support teams, and restoring IT systems and ensuring employees are able to return to their daily work tasks following an emergency. Of course, since disaster recovery and business continuity have different goals and job roles, the way each department prepares for a crisis will be unique. Disaster recovery staff must assess all the possible technical crises that could hit their organization, such as failed changes, end-of-life failures, or cybersecurity related events. The team will hold regular drills or exercises to ensure that the entire business is aware of these threats and knows what to do in case of a technical emergency. They should also establish a way to effectively distribute their disaster recovery plans, contact lists, and other key documentation to the technical staff and other shareholders or stakeholders. Meanwhile, business continuity teams develop plans to avoid potential business disrupting problems. Typically, those continuity plans aren't distributed to the entire company, but rather to key stakeholders who would be involved in business continuity efforts. This might include the executive team, the IT department, corporate communications, and other related groups. Of course, despite the differences between disaster recovery and business continuity, in the end, these two distinct departments or functions are both working towards the same objective, to help ensure the success of the business. Their specific day-to-day focus may be very different, but by cooperating and collaborating together, these two teams will be much better positioned to succeed in the face of any kind of adversity. Many organizations consider business continuity as a planning function. Develop a plan, and you're all set. However, as so many organizations have painfully realized, just having a plan is not enough. Components of an effective business continuity program include the definition and documentation of critical services across all lines of business, both external facing as well as internal facing. Identifying the risk tolerances associated to disruptions. In other words, how much risk is the organization willing to ingest before the viability is threatened? Identifying the business impacts of those critical services based on those tolerance levels, both financially and non-financially. And then finally, recovery expectations of the supporting technologies, both in terms of time as well as data currency. In addition to understanding the business perspective as to what processes and services are most important, there is also a need for technology resilience, including the understanding of what is needed to maintain a continuity of operation for infrastructure, systems, and most importantly, data across the organization. Business continuity is truly a holistic approach, leaving no stone unturned in establishing a framework and plan to improve and maintain resilience. When considering core components that are most important to maintaining a continuity of operation, regardless of what situation your organization is responding to, there are two activities that rise to the top. The first is a threat risk assessment. Now, there are 4 high-level steps to consider when conducting this activity. And just to be clear, this is not a once-and-done type of process. As businesses change, as service expectations shift, and how the organization or community views risk, this is an important component to ensure overall resilience in your business. The first and seemingly obvious step is to have a consistent way of collecting the information that will give you an understanding of the threats and risks to your organization. Any information needs to be reliable, verifiable, and credible. This step does take some effort to ensure that only validated information is included in your assessment. Once you've implemented a consistent method of gathering information, you then need to take a holistic approach to identifying any and all potential information risks and vulnerabilities within your organization. Now, you need to think of risk in terms of the probability that the threat may actually happen and how often it may negatively impact the organization. How quickly the threat increases to the point of having that negative impact. And finally, the degree of impact, and then the overall length of the impact to your organization. As IT security professionals, this unfortunately is where you put your doomsday hat on and think about the worst case scenarios, leaving no stone unturned. Now, after identifying all of the threat vectors based on the criteria we've just discussed, then an evaluation of these risks must take place. We need to look at which threats are outside of our control, and as such, may not have a clear strategy to minimize or mitigate. Think about historical situations and those threats that have had a prior warning and those that caught everybody completely off guard. This will help in looking for those indications of an impending adverse event. Part of the evaluation includes the threats that may be somewhat within our control. Think about the impacts in terms of how to respond based on the availability of security protocols, staffing resources, or technology assets. And as well, the availability of other critical infrastructure necessary to minimize the risk or impact based on that effective response. And then finally, in conducting a threat risk assessment, the last step is to identify and evaluate the efficacy of controls and mitigating information security safeguards. The hope is that these controls are put into place to proactively improve the overall chances of overcoming these risks, as well as lessening the impacts if the threat did turn into an emergency. When thinking about the impacts, focus on the controls and protections that can be implemented to shelter your most critical information infrastructure that may actually be needed as part of the response to the threat. And at the same time, ensure the continuity of operation for your organization. Now, you'll want to outline in detail what controls may inhibit the exposure of the threat in order to minimize the impact, and then proactive steps that can be taken to reduce the probability of the disruption of that continuity of operation for your critical services. Now, these 4 steps are going to take some time and a lot of involvement from many different subject matter experts across your organization. The outcomes of the threat risk assessment will help identify resiliency strategies for your organization that minimize the impacts of any foreseeable risk. These strategies need to be discussed practically with all levels of the organization to figure out operational tactics to manage these prioritized risks and then apply the business expectations and those services most critical to the organization's viability. The second important activity related to ensuring overall resilience within your organization is the business impact analysis, or the BIA. In every organization, teams, departments, or divisions provide value back to the organization, either internally or externally. During the BIA process, though, focus needs to be around those processes for which need to be maintained, regardless of what adverse event is happening. These services, in essence, to keep the lights on, would be those deemed as critical. We then need to understand the impacts to the organization if those critical services didn't meet the expectations of stakeholders and customers. These impacts must be captured with both qualitative and quantitative measures. Once the critical services are identified and the impacts captured, the next step is to identify recovery time objectives and recovery point objectives, or data currency, for those applications and technology solutions that directly support the critical services and processes. All of this information is then used to assess the capabilities of the IT function to recover those applications and solutions based on business expectations, or work in collaboration to minimize the overall impacts when responding to an adverse event. Now, having created these objectives, the next step is to assess whether the organization's technology, infrastructure, systems, and data can actually meet those objectives. It's important to understand the resources and time necessary to complete each process as part of the critical service. However, based on the dependency of technology infrastructure, the BIA and these follow-on steps play a critical role in ensuring business resilience in times of crisis. The outcome of the overall BIA process serves to validate the potential impacts at an operational level, based on understanding the threats and risks that an organization can face. The objective is to really define criteria surrounding the impacts of these threats and develop measurable tolerances and strategies. Then a prioritized response in such a way as it really minimizes the risk to that continuity of operation for those most critical services and processes. Now, similar to conducting a threat risk assessment and really done in parallel to completing a BIA for the organization's most critical services, a related framework is applied to the organization's technology landscape. Now, this model delivers a repeatable and consistent technique for assessing an organization's information security capability. Now, the model consists of 3 steps. IT-specific data must be collected either through an automated process, such as a configuration management database, or through other methods we discussed during the threat risk assessment. This is important to understand where there may be redundancies across different infrastructure components, where there might be single points of failure within the infrastructure or core systems, and whether appropriate contingencies are active to ensure availability. Now, the capability assessment is completed by scoring the assets in the IT environment against the data gathered using a set of prescripted scoring methods. These methods are leveraged to assess whether the capabilities of each application meets recovery objectives and service level targets. As well, this step evaluates the strength of staffing, documentation, and current disaster recovery plans. To ensure objectivity in the scoring of this step, my experience is that it should be facilitated by an unbiased, independent team outside of the IT function. And then the final step in this framework is the prioritized remediation. Now, based on the resulting scores from the assessment, organizations can identify those services in the IT environment with the greatest gaps in their capabilities and are in greatest need of remediation. Now, this assessment model can be customized and applied in any organization to take a real IT-centric view to assess business resilience and information security. Assessing your technology capabilities requires a flexible and comprehensive approach in parallel to the BIA process. Many organizations struggle with the correlation between this technology function and business processes. It's a crucial part of developing a resilient business continuity program and plan in understanding the sequencing of ensuring the availability of all aspects of the technology environment. Now, ultimately, access to data to support the critical services may be the end game. However, that result must first draw attention to the need to have systems and hardware that is associated to the access to data available and reliable. If this time and effort is not taken, the result is a limit in the ability to maintain that continuity of operation based on the lack of supports. Now, the reality is that every organization is or at above capacity on prioritizing and priorities that maybe enhance customer service or increase profitability and or strengthen brand reputation. Very little focus and attention on a regular basis is put towards business continuity or business resilience. It is just assumed that it is in place when adverse events occur. The challenge, though, is that the journey towards resilience takes time and perseverance in some cases. In order to get from a world of risk to resilience, there are steps that we've talked about that are important and crucial. Identifying critical services, conducting a threat risk assessment, and then walking through a business impact analysis with all lines of business are three very important ingredients to move this journey forward. And as you can expect, the journey itself is not a straight one. Early on, there's going to be a lot of hesitation, trepidation, and lack of commitment. As the journey continues and more understanding of the value and importance of walking through these steps becomes clearer, there's a moment of truth that shifts the momentum into a positive direction, where ongoing engagement is truly supported and championed by all levels of the organization. So really, the message is to stay the course. Business continuity and disaster recovery planning aren't just insurance policies for the inevitable events that organizations face, but strategic imperatives that provide value and ensure long-term viability in a very uncertain world. Now, again, before we end our session today, we still have quite a lot of time for any questions or further comments about what I've shared today. I also want to thank you for joining me today and thank Bill from Learning Brick for hosting this webinar today. So please put your questions in the chat and Bill can facilitate that, and I'll be more than happy to try and answer.
Perfect. Thanks, Jason. So like Jason said, any questions, feel free to drop them into the chat. Questions on training, questions on the presentation, consulting, anything like that, we're happy to help. We pretty much, between the two, our partnership here between Learning Brick and Castleline, we're pretty much set up to be able to be a one-stop solution for anything that you may need. Thanks, Andre. Thanks, Pat. And I do have a question about getting a recording. Yep, not a problem. We'll make sure that recording is sent to everybody that signed up. That one I'm not sure. The question was, some of us are InfoSec student graduating soon. Is it possible to get a co-op or internship with Castle Line Security? Um, that one I would probably point you in a Castle Line's direction, obviously. Um, maybe go onto their website and click on the contact us. They have a great team over there. They'd be able to point you in the right direction if there is opportunities there.
Absolutely. Yeah, feel free to reach out by all means. We're always welcome to take a look at new skills and expertise in this space, and always enjoy furthering that conversation.
And thanks, Quan. All the best. Thanks for attending. And the next one is Carol. Jason, I'll let you take this one. Would you recommend businesses create templates for planning stages? And are there any examples?
So there's many different templates out there with respects to the different processes like threat risk assessments, BIAs, and even developing business continuity plans. The challenge, though, is that there isn't one sort of golden egg that supports all organizations generically. Because every organization has different critical services and services that are consistent with their mission and vision, really want to temper and cater those processes to your organization. We certainly come in and take a look at, what is the holistic view of developing your business continuity program and going through these different activities. But again, we can certainly look at what kind of templates that can get you started for sure.
Next question, Jason, I'll throw that one to you as well. Should you plan from the outside in or from the inside out, or is it business specific?
That's a great question. And quite honestly, it is business specific. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is we're seeing a lot of threat vectors that are starting from the inside out. And so you really want to take that both perspective view when you're developing it. But you want to start with what is most important to the business, and then what are those potential risks that could harm the viability of each of those businesses? Great question.
Perfect. Anybody else have any other questions? Well, we got some extra time, so obviously we'll kick around as long as there's questions, and then we can assist in any way we can here. Oh, another one, Jason. In your opinion, what would or could trigger a reassessment of the current plans?
And certainly, just at least reviewing the current plan should happen on a regular basis, whether it is every 2 years, every 4 years, whatever you sense is a good cadence. Other triggers could include changes to services that are being provided to your stakeholders and customers, any internal process change that is deemed significant, or reorganization within your operational areas. Any process that goes through a significant remodeling or transformation, you should certainly reassess the current plans. As an example, I had a client that conducted a BIA 2 years ago. And when we revisited the results of that BIA recently, we found that there are significant changes to the expectations. So these plans and these assessments aren't a once and done. And so you really want to keep it top of mind when you're continuing to move through the business cycles to determine, should you be taking a look at the assessment? Because business continuity is much more value than just dealing with an emergency and continuity of operation. It increases competitive advantage. It constantly looks for efficiencies in your operational processes based on understanding what the expectations are for your customers. So certainly anything specific to business change should be a trigger for sure.
And to kind of go along with that, in my experience too, with different clients, it's we used to use the term, if this happens, or this could happen, and we're starting to see that less, and it's now not if, it's when, because what happens is you don't know what you have until you go and look. And if you never look, you're really putting yourself, your stakeholders, your organization, even your staff in a position to try to, for lack of better terms, manipulate or manage something that's outside of anybody's control. So staying ahead of the game is super key, but also making sure that the individuals that are involved understand what their roles are when, and again, I stress this, not if, but when that happens.
Absolutely. The worst case scenario is having to develop your business continuity plans at the early stages of an emergency. And
Mhm.
we've all been there and we've all been in that situation, but you really want to be able to focus on establishing these standards and these expectations when there is normal status quo happening with your organization.
The other thing that is key to bring up here, and again, this is more like with a governance and budgetary requirements, but by doing this, you stay ahead of that. So I've had a lot of different clients kind of roll out new systems or new services. And then once they're rolled out, they realize for lack of better examples, because we're in the training field, they have no budget left for training. So now they have new systems, new services, new requirements, but they've spent their budget on that. So it wasn't properly aligned or outlined prior to that. So just trying to stay ahead of the curve is super key for many different reasons.
Absolutely.
Any
I
other
see.
questions, guys?
I see there's one question saying about
Oh,
should continuity planning be taken into account when large contracts with stakeholders or customers are being considered? Yes, without a doubt. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to revisit and redo all of your assessments and all of your BIAs, but just be considerate of reviewing those changes at that same time. So certainly, it does need to be taken into account when you have large changes to your organization.
you're welcome. Thanks for the questions. Anybody else have any questions before we end this session? Again, the recording will be sent out. We'll have to do a little editing on it or whatever, but it should be sent out within the next 24 or 48 hours. Again, you'll have our contact details, can be found on Learning Brick and on CastlineInformationSecurity.com. But with that being said, I'll thank you from my perspective, and I'll throw it over to Jason just to close the session out.
Absolutely. And I appreciate everybody's time and insights or questions. But to Bill's point, if anyone wants to further the conversation around business continuity and how we may be able to help increase or sustain your business resilience within your organization, please feel free to reach out to me directly or through our website. And I'd love to spend some time and discuss what we can do to help. So thank you very much for your time today.
Perfect. Well, thanks very much, everybody. Have a great day. Enjoy
Take care.
take care.
Bye-bye.